Welcome, Jessica. I'm very thrilled to have you on the show and just want to thank you for participating and being vulnerable. I mean, I've read your question. You were selected because your question is something that I believe is going to help so many people. And just, first of all, I'm so sorry for what you've gone through. And my listeners will hear why I'm saying that to you now when you tell us your story. But I'm sorry for what you've gone through. And I'm very impressed with how you've actually turned your life around. So Jessica, please just tell us a little bit about your background and why you're on the show and what your question was.
Thank you, Dr. Leaf. My name is Jessica, and I am a survivor of domestic violence. I have 4 children, and we are all survivors of domestic violence. We have been out of that environment for the last 12, 13 years, and we're very open about our story. We work hard to help set others free. We believe that somebody else's sin is not our shame. And so we've worked hard as individuals and as a family to become healthy. And I had some questions about rewiring the brain as far as it comes to children and surviving domestic violence. And, I have some questions in regards to like what happens to a child's brain when they have experienced domestic violence, and how long would it take to rewire and, heal residual effects of domestic violence. Do children tend to fight that? Is it a guarantee that when they grow up, they're going to have those same tendencies?
Well, excellent question and very serious question. And so I want to start with the second part of the question, and then go back to the other part of the question. Everything that a person experiences is going to physically wire into the mind, the brain, and the body. So it becomes embodied. But it's not a permanent thing. What happens to you will always be there, but what it looks like inside of your brain and your body and your mind, 3 different things that work together, is that can be changed. So the potential for someone to repeat the patterns, we see that all the time in history. We see that all the time. I mean, you've just got your master's in counseling, which is amazing. So congratulations. You just told me before we started. And you would have also, this is a standard, we understand that patterns can perpetuate. And very often, someone who's been bullied will bully, and someone who's been abused will abuse. And that it is because it's unmanaged. So if we don't deal with stuff, if we don't get to the source and deconstruct and reconstruct, recognizing that you cannot change what's happened to you, but you can change, and this is key to your question, you can change what it looks like inside of you, and therefore how it plays out into your future. And that is absolutely critical. So the part of the question where you say, is it hereditary? No, it's not hereditary. What will happen is that the experience of the abuse, and we can go into a little bit more detail in a moment, would have been an experience that wired into the brain. I want to see if I've got my toxic trees here. No, I don't have them here. But there's those of you that you've watched me, you've seen, I talk about the trees all the time. Everything that you go through from the moment you wake up till the moment you go to sleep, from the time that a certain point in the womb, you're not sure at what point, until the age that you're at now, every experience has become part of you, part of your psychoneurobiology. So for sure, every incident of the abuse and seeing the abuse of the siblings and of you and of the situation and all the detail, all of that is inside mind, brain, and body. It's an experience that they've had. The beauty of neuroplasticity and of the mind, brain, body connection and psychoneurobiology, whatever you want to call it, is basically that that's not going to dictate our future if we manage it. So the good news is that it's not hereditary. It's in them, but it doesn't mean that they're going to do it if it's managed. If it's unmanaged, there's no guarantee what will happen, whether it will come out in abuse, whether it will come out in more major mental health crises, whether it'll come out in suicide, who knows what. So that's why it's so absolutely critical. Physical illnesses, challenges with physical health, the impact will come out somewhere, but that volcano will explode. And that's why what we want to do is we want to manage the explosions so that we can get the volcano dormant. And once it's dormant, as we know, the dormant volcano is still there, but it's no longer exploding. I actually put up there was something on my social media the other day with the volcanoes exploding, that kind of thing. It's just such a great analogy to think of. So no, it's not hereditary. Whatever your spouse did, your ex-husband, I'm not sure of the situation, I assume it's your ex-husband, did, there's a reason why he did that. That doesn't justify his actions ever. But there's work that he needs to obviously do to go and sort out that? Because if you track back in the history, I don't know if you've done that, if there's history of violence in his family. Okay, so there is.
Oh, yes, very much.
Okay, and in going back a few generations or just one?
Yes. So his grandmother had told my father of some domestic violence. So yes, for sure. It's somebody I grew up with and I married. And so that's how I know the family history. There's definitely an established family history of domestic violence.
Okay. And so he was abused as a child as well?
Yes.
Okay. And so that was not, do you know anything? You grew up with him. Did they do anything? Was there any management of it? Was there any therapy? Was there any discussion, intervention, or was it all just kind of?
Oh, it was a hidden secret. Even as I divorced him, I was accused of lying. And then the more that we broke free and told our story, we got help. We went to a therapist. It was after my divorce that he himself called me and was wanting me to know his parents had been arrested for domestic violence against his sister. And so I could hear like the little voice in the little boy in his, in his heart saying like, see, I told you. There had been an incident when we were married where he called my dad, my sister, and his parents to the house. He had picked me up, shoved me through 2 doors, punched me, threw me down, and had called them over so that we could get help for our problems. I've done a lot of EMDR therapy for that. So that's why like I have the memories of the events, but I can talk through the events without the strong emotions. That took me years to work.
Years. Mm-hmm.
And it's still not my favorite thing to think about, but yes, there is definitely an established pattern. I immediately got my children in weekly therapy and we've worked on it a lot. And so I don't see the emotional outburst. What I see a lot more of is the flashbacks, the memory, almost like the obsessive intrusive thoughts that lead to either a really high anxiety or a deep depression. That's how I see it manifest in my children. We talk a lot about breaking generational curses, renewing the mind. So we take a lot of psychology and mix it with the word and have that faith-based aspect of it. I guess my concern is more, how do I help my child with that, just that obsessive, intrusive? I feel like I can't nip that. It's almost like a deeper root than the outburst that is not getting nipped.
Okay, that's really well explained. Okay, so you're doing a lot of, as everything you've been doing is fantastic. So you're really moving in the right direction. That's going to carry on forever. It's not going to, it's a lifelong journey, as you already know. And so that's one thing I want to say. So it's not hereditary. It doesn't mean because the reason you see patterns in the family is because people don't deal with it. So that energy sort of builds up inside of you. The thoughts are there and you don't know what to do with it because we're wired for love. Every single part of our brain and our body is not designed for this. And what we are drawn as humans, we're drawn to imbalance, like something like domestic violence is imbalance. We're drawn to that, not because we're drawn to that because we're bad or evil or whatever. It's because we see the imbalance and we're trying to restore balance. But when you're perpetually in a not negative situation, that toxic tree, that experience is really big inside the brain. So it's built physically into the brain as these protein tree-like structures. And literally what's happening is as the experience is happening of the abuse, that is all the experience is being captured. It's like big waves going through the brain, like a big tsunami is going through the brain, and it creates these neurochemical responses and electromagnetic responses. And excuse me getting technical, but your question is how long does it take? So I'm going to give you some technical to get to the point of how long and why. So as it's happening, each part of the incident becomes like a concept that's captured as a vibration inside the brain. So it goes in the brain as these waves. So the physical, even the impact on the body, all of that's going inside the body and into the brain, and it's being captured in the brain as little vibrations inside of little proteins that grow into these networks in the neurons, so the top part of the neurons. And then also in between the neurons, there's space, and that's gravitational field. So there's like echoes, if it makes sense, of these erratic patterns being echoed, like a resonance of these trees. And then in the body, there's a change structurally inside every cell. And those cells have different structures, but there's something called a microtubule, which is the cytoskeleton. And it also stores, it's also these little protein structures that hold the vibration. A little bit different to the brain one. The brain one is a little bit more kind of like detailed and insightful, and the body one is more like a sensation. So, but it goes in all 3 places. So it's this wired experience into networks of the brain, the gravitational fields around the brain and through the body, and then the physical change inside the actual cells. Now, based on that just shows you already the level of impact. So when we go through healing, we have to do it all. So the EMDR would have helped pull it up from the little vibrations inside the little microtubules in the cells. It would have found the areas where the energy had really clustered and created sort of areas of pockets of like damage. So whatever the gut is often a very first example, and various illnesses, whatever, there's a very strong link between the biological change, which I show in my research as well. So essentially, when you do things like EMDR, you are finding those spots in your body, and you're learning how to, as they activate it, the sensations that they create, you're learning, as you know, you've gone through the process, you're learning how to deal with that incredible response that gets triggered, that can be completely overwhelming. It can throw you back into those ruminating patterns and the deep depressions, etc., etc. So I love the EMDR, along with a lot of working through the different elements of what comes up. So anything like EMDR, anything like basic therapy where you start talking about your feelings and things like that, we need to do those in a sequence that aligns with how the mind built the stuff into the brain in the first place, so that we can reverse engineer that. So if we don't follow the sequence, it can make the healing process a bit jumbled and take a bit longer. So the sequence is really important. And this is, in terms of how long will it take your children to heal, and why they're still having, the ruminating thoughts, the flashbacks, the fear, that it is going to take time. There is no quick answer for this. But in the healing process at this stage, you've done so much great stuff about, getting into the therapy and so on. What we want to do is make sure that you prepare the brain and get the neurophysiology under control, and in every sort of experience of managing this process, so each kind of therapeutic experience. And you also want to make sure that we don't just bring things up through all the various different techniques that there are, dialectical behavior therapy and mindfulness and dialectical DBT does a bit more talking and that kind of thing. But you don't want to just bring things up through meditation and mindfulness. That's only one part. That's almost like preparing the brain. You have to also go beyond that and process through that very sequentially over time, to take that energy that's been built into that toxic network, each incident, each part of each incident, which are the memories, each detail of each incident, the memories coalescing into that thought tree, which every incident that happened was adding more and more to that tree, was getting bigger and bigger. And there were connected ones because there would have been like yourself and then your children, and the experience of worrying about your children, and your children would have had theirs, plus the experience of seeing their siblings and their mom and all of that. So it's a lot of like a whole forest that's connected. And because of each of our individual perceptions and coping mechanisms, each of you would have coped in your own way. And thank goodness you have this network that you've created, and you've got a bond with your kids and you're helping them. So those are all fantastic things to help them. What you want to do is keep taking that process and pushing it in the right direction in order to rewire the brain. So healing will come, freedom will come. Those ruminating thoughts can become your best friend. Those intrusive ruminating thoughts that can lead to the deep depressions can become your best friend if you understand how to manage them. So key with this process is two elements. The one is to get the right sequence over the right time, because your brain is pretty much it's a very complex physical structure that works on principles of energy and order. And your mind is this infinite, wise, spiritual, deep, incredibly fast, intelligent thing that never gets tired. That's your non-conscious mind. Then your conscious mind it gets tired, but it's doing kind of the work, learning to work with the non-conscious mind. So if we just bring stuff up and talk and don't land the plane, if you just let the planes take off, and we only fly a bit, and we don't have experience, and we don't sort of manage the flying, we could crash the plane. So what's happening with a lot of people in therapeutic environments is that they get really good at preparing the brain, doing the mindfulness, doing the talking, bringing things up, saying, I feel like this, I feel like that, this happened, I know the root cause, finding the root cause. But if you don't go through the process over time and and do reconceptualizing in that process, the plane will crash. So in some cases, people just let the plane take off. So they just talk about feelings. So they just do sort of mindfulness-based stuff, which puts a Band-Aid on the wound. Band-Aid on the wound helps in the moment. Excellent for neurophysiology, calming down and so on. But it doesn't rewire. It's not going to rewire the brain. It's just going to give you coping mechanisms, which we need. We need decompression. We need the meditation. We need all those things, but it's not enough. That's just letting the plane take off. We've got to fly the plane. We've got to land the plane. And that's where I developed a system of the Neurocycle, was how can you get all of these in as a vehicle within which you put however you decide to do brain preparation, which is all the breathing, meditation. There's multiple ways of doing that. You put that in. But if you want to use DBT, if you want to use ACT, CBT, there's so many different systems, psychodynamic therapy, the counseling techniques you've learned, techniques that the therapists give you. There's some amazing stuff out there. You want to use those in the right sequence over the right time frame. That's really critical for rewiring. So how long does it take to rewire? It's going to take cycles of 63 to 66 days. So we don't rewire something in 24 hours, 48 hours, 21 days. It's definite physical cycles of around about 63 days to 66 days, and it will be multiple cycles, especially with something as extreme as what you've gone through. This is on the scale of 9 and 10. If you look at a trauma scale, this is extreme trauma, and it's going to have changed and impacted your children absolutely, physiologically, mentally. It's the whole psychoneurobiology. That's a fact. We can't get away from it. But we can change what it looks like. But that change requires a very sequential process over time. So 15 to 45 minutes a day is what I would really encourage you to encourage your children and yourself to do, to get into a system. Take 15 to 45 minutes a day. Sounds like a lot, but it's not really when you get down to, brass tacks and so on. And you do it daily for 21 days. And what you do daily is the Neurocycle. And I'll go through that in a moment in more depth. From day 22 through 63, you're stabilizing. So you just have to do the Neurocycle for 5 minutes a day. When you finish that, you're working on one aspect or one part of the thought, because your thoughts, depending on how bushy they are and how much stuff is in them and how many connected areas there are, it's probably going to require maybe years of work. But every single Neurocycle, this rhythm that you get into, is going to be rewiring things in the right direction. And at some point, it's like this sort of hyperbolic curve that goes, suddenly you get this massive impact because you get like slow, then suddenly it starts going faster once you get into the system. But I do anticipate probably a couple of years of hard work for each of you and your children, maybe less, but of like where it's quite intense. And then you'll start seeing that things will pop up for the rest of your life. I wouldn't stop doing it, but it will definitely be getting easier over time. Every single 66 days, I can guarantee that you're going to feel 100% better than what you felt at the beginning of the 63 days because of that process. What happens a lot in therapy when, my years of practicing clinically and working with people, and then just my experience now with the millions of people that we reach on this platform, is people will feedback comments like, I went to the therapy, it helped me so much, but I felt like at some point I was going in circles. And, that's, you've sort of told me the same thing, and I'm not running, therapy is really important. I'm not running that down. I'm totally all for counseling and therapy. But with your training now as well, that you have to empower a person to manage their mind. So it's your children that are the ages of 15, 20, 24, and 26. They're the ones that are waking up with their mind in the morning at 3 a.m. with a panic attack or a flashback, or during the day, or when they're driving to work, or whatever it is that they do. They can't immediately always phone you or phone a therapist or have a therapist. They've got to know how to manage their own mind, as do you 24/7, as do all of us 24/7. So priority in just being alive. Take the trauma out of it, just being alive. We have to know how to manage our mind. Then the next layer is we've got to manage the damage. We've got to manage the impact of the different levels of damage. And so therefore we want to understand the timing and the cycles. So you would do detoxing for the 15 to 45 minutes a day for the first 21 days. Why 15 to 45 for the first 21 days is because that is where we see massive changes in the brain as you go through the 5 steps, which is to gather awareness, to reflect, to put everything on paper, which then connects the 2 sides of the brain and gets deep insight and introspection, and then recheck and active reach. My listeners that are watching this, they know that they can get the detail of those 5 steps on the Neurocycle app and in my book. And I've got a book coming out for children, How to Help Your Child Clean Up Their Mental Mess. So this is for 2 to 10-year-olds. That comes out in August, and people can pre-order that. The link is in the show notes. But essentially, within the first 21 days, what we're doing is we are bringing the thought into consciousness. And we are initially just seeing how we show up, our emotions, our behaviors, our bodily sensations, our perspectives. Those, if you think of 4 balloons attached to a tree, as we start focusing on our emotions, it starts pulling the thought from the non-conscious into the conscious mind. The thought's got roots, a trunk, and branches. It looks like a tree. As you start then recognizing the behaviors that go along with the emotions, that brings it up a bit more. As you start recognizing the bodily sensations that go along with the emotions and the behaviors, it brings it up more. As you notice observe your perspectives and how that's influencing you in the moment in that situation, it's bringing up more. So let's say that one of your children, you're seeing the flashbacks in a specific situation, then you're going to be doing this work around that specific situation, whichever is the most sort of detrimental to their functioning in one time, in any time point. And I'm going to quickly explain this, and then I'm going to ask you, we'll kind of walk through a little example. So we want to very sequentially start each session with a simple sentence describing each of those, understanding that an emotion never lives alone. It's always linked to a behavior, to a body sensation, and to a perception. A lot of times they're handled separately and they get jumbled, and that your effect is lost. The rewiring is not as organized. It won't be as effective. You won't feel as empowered to deal with the stuff. So we want to be very sequenced with it. Once you've gathered awareness of those 4 signals, you want to then go to the reflect, which is like shining a light through a prism, where you shine the light and it comes out with a rainbow, and white light becomes a rainbow of color on the other side. You want to go deep. Why do I have this specific emotion? Do I have more emotions? And you're still gathering data. The gather awareness and the reflect are, what are the 4 signals? And then, what are they looking like in my life? Why am I doing these? What do they look like? What's the sort of shape of them? It's the branches of the tree. Because when I find those 4 signals, I've pulled the tree up. And as I go to reflect, I'm kind of like looking at the shape of the tree, the direct impact, the things I'm saying, the things I'm doing. How's it manifesting? Oh, in my relationship, I tend to say this, I tend to be doing this, or whatever. So it's to find, that's the next level down. And very specifically around those 4 signals, you kind of hang everything around those 4 signals. So it's really how it's showing up. That's what you're looking at the tree level. And then it's the next little step. And in the day, in one session, it's about 3 minutes that you spend on each. So you're not solving it all in one day. It's very broken up. Then you would dump that all on paper, all over the place. The more messy, the better, because it's going to create a very deep dive into the non-conscious mind. And then you're going to look at what you've written to find patterns and triggers. And as you know from our work, the metacog is an ideal way it really brings things up. And I explained that in the video, in the app, and then also in the book. And then you're going to try and find, the recheck is to look at what you've written and to reconceptualize it. This has happened, what can I do? And then you create a little action. Then you do this the next day and the next day and the next day. And each day you are seeing more on the branches, more of, I saw it like that. That's how I cope. That on the branches is a trauma response. It's a fawn trauma response. It's a people-pleasing response because of that. And you start seeing, that came from there and that came from there. Because all of you know what the roots are. It's the abuse. But to see how you specifically have reacted to that incident or that element of the incident, or that reaction when they saw you cry or something like that, each of those is to see how did that manifest. So that deep work of linking the behavior, that's not going to happen in one day. That's going to take time. So it'll take about 21 days to kind of make those links. And in doing that, you have weakened that neural network in the brain. And you've taken the energy of power that was sort of negative, toxic power, that energy that was stimulating your immune response to like protect you and look after you and think it's a pathogen, but now becoming a hyperimmune response because the issue's still there and all that kind of stuff. That's getting under control. You're getting empowered so that's happening slowly, but that does not happen quickly. It takes literally a full 21 days of working through this process. And as you're working through it, you may see, all right, this is too much here. There's too much in this root. So I'm just going to focus on this one aspect. And I'm just going to work on this for the next 63 days. The smaller you chunk, the better you're going to, because every thought, especially if the thought's big, and you may want to be able to sort of pull it apart, maybe that time frame in your life, or this one particular incident is really one that's flashing back the most. And that's what we're going to kind of prioritize. So before you sort of dive in, you want to sort of prioritize. So whatever that one is, you then want to work on and just sort of isolate down to that. And then work on that's manageable. And then once you feel you've sort of got a handle on that, which happens around 21 days, then we're going to start practicing, okay, this is how I'm going to, reconceptualize it. Because as you're recreating, you reconceptualize daily. You don't just look at all the stuff. Each day is a very closed sequence in that you bring it up, you see the mess, you find the trigger, what can I do today? At this point, I'm here. How can I get through today? And then tomorrow I add another layer and another layer. So each day there's a solution, but it's just a tiny part of the solution. By the time you hit day 21, you've kind of got a better solution for that aspect. And then you want to stabilize that. Before you start working on another aspect, you want to just spend 5 minutes a day working on stabilizing so that you've got that response to that trauma that was a coping mechanism that's not going away, and it keeps evidence, flashbacks, evidence, depression, evidence, it's there, that those are the signs. So you want to just break that. You want to weaken that part of the root and heal that part of the root so that gets small and the healthy tree gets nice and big. So it's one tree, but you're going to take the toxic side and reduce its energy. You're going to take the bad energy, put it into the good energy, because energy is never lost. And that second part of stabilizing is going to happen from day 22 to 63. So at day 21, day 1, it's all toxic. Day 21, it's half and half. And by day 63, it is tiny, the little toxic part, and you've got a healthy part over that. When someone's been through a lot of therapy, like your kids have, very often they're starting at the point where it's half and half. They know the root, they've made some level of association, but there's still this almost stuckness. And that leads to that rumination that can become OCD-like. And then you're looking for OCD is just basically looking for coping mechanisms to deal with that pain. It's a sort of very similarly linked to addiction. These are behavior patterns. It's one of the signals. It's a behavior. It's not a disease. It's a behavior that's really being used to just try and deal with this energy that's inside of me that's still. So by doing this sort of analytical breakdown as much as you can cope with in a day, not too much. If it's too much and overwhelming, you stop. That's why I say 15 to 45. If you can only handle 5 minutes, that's fine. You do what you can handle. Some days you'll do 5 minutes. Some days you'll do 45. Some days you'll do the 45 and it'll trigger you and you're going to book a session with your therapist and say, hey, I need to see you like ASAP. And then you just go and unpack what you've done. So this is something you can do yourself. Your children can do themselves. And that very ordered sequential process will rewire. Once they've done the one, then you go back and you then pick up the other aspect. And so you go on. Okay, so let's make this a little practical for the last sort of 10 minutes that we have together. As comfortable as you are, either use yourself or if one of your children have given you permission, let's think of what would be, if I had to ask you, what is, with all this explanation, what would be the sort of top thing that is the most disruptive to your behavior currently that is manifesting in flashbacks, ruminations, whatever that's just affecting your day-to-day functioning or your whatever. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth. What jumps up into your mind? Either you can use yourself or if your children have given you permission, you can use an example from them. Whatever's you the most comfortable with.
It's the blaming. And I guess we would call it gaslighting, but I did this because you made me. So he reached out to myself and my oldest in January, wanting phone numbers for all the other kids and stuff. And I just didn't reply. We live in the day of social media. If he really wanted to get their numbers, he could. And my oldest said he wasn't going to, but it stirred all that up. So the emails come across like it's your fault. I don't have contact. You need to do this. It's a command demand response. And so that triggers in me that feeling of powerlessness. In the story that I told you about that I can send you the link for, my son talks about an incident where I stood in front of him and intervened on his dad throwing him and punching him. And so it's constant. There was a constant pattern of you made me do this. So it's like disempowering of taking our voice. And so there's like something in me that still, like, I still get reactive to the emails. Like, what do you mean I'm keeping you from your daughters? He has chosen to walk away for the last 7 years, but then he'll randomly pop up like that with the accusations, with the demanding. I have a permanent restraining order. I have a lot of people involved, a lot of safeguards around. I don't per se fear him coming back around, although he has like shown up in places and I've had to get cops involved in. So, I mean, I guess it doesn't completely go away. I don't know if I'm really specifically answering your question. I just know since January, I'll find myself getting upset. And then if I'm upset about something, I'm using a curse word. And I go, okay, I'm looking for power. I'm feeling disempowered right now because I know that that's when I curse. I know I'm grasping for control. I know I'm safe. Now, intellectually, I can tell you in this moment I'm safe, but I can feel it in my body. I can feel it in my brain. But it's panic.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm really sorry that, that you're experiencing this. But it's a very normal reaction to an adverse circumstance. So it's okay to feel this messiness in you, and there's no blame, and you can see how long these things take. So thank you for sharing that, because that blame that he's putting on you and you feeling the powerlessness, that would definitely be the tree that I would work on. And you know what it is. I mean, you can tell me everything. You've got all the language, you've got everything, so you can describe each element. So what I would do if I was you, as a suggestion, is to get a big piece of paper or get a whiteboard or something like that, or get a journal, however you want, and actually draw a tree that you've got enough room. And actually don't draw the tree so that your roots can start sort of growing out, if you can picture this. So the roots, you can big piece of paper, and you can do multiple trees. Okay, you can do multiple pieces of paper if you can't fit it all in one. And in fact, each day you may use one for a couple of days and then keep growing them. And what you want to do in the root section is you can describe the incident like you've described it to me. And as you say, you're able to do it because you've done the EMDR, so that pain to a certain extent is healed, but it never goes away. So yes, you've got to the extent where you can talk about it, but it's still triggering you and still making you feel those feelings of, as you said, powerlessness and frustration and anger at the powerlessness. At this stage, that tree of yours is half and half. It can go either way. You're still being very, triggered by that. What we want to get is to the point where you can shrink that incident of how he says those things to the point where you can, it still hurts, but it's a hurt that is a few moments you've coped with it and you've dealt with it and you can move on, and it doesn't steal your empowerment that you've worked so hard to regain. That blaming, that putting it on, trying to put his issues onto you. You'll be able to, at this stage, it's still cutting into you and affecting how so you want to, does that make sense? So you've got all the languaging, you can describe it all, and that's why I want you to draw this tree. And I want you to draw the tree with literally one half that's two halves that are equal. The one side is, and the roots are all like the ugly stuff, as much as you can deal with, remember, a little bit day by day. And on the other side, where you've grown and what you've done. So kind of where the counterbalances come in. And then as you draw the branches of the tree, on the one side of the ugly things coming out of the ugly roots, and in terms of the ugly things, I still feel disempowered. I still feel like I'm being blamed. It's still getting me. It's still triggering me. Those kinds of things. Just put those on there. And then on the other side where you'd like to be. Now, you're not going to get this all in one day. And you're going to do this using the 5 steps. So you're not going to just boom it out, okay? What you're going to do is you're going to just kind of draw the shape of the tree. And then you're going to say, okay, let me gather awareness of my emotions, and my feelings and my behaviors and my perspective in this moment where I'm actually standing right at the moment. And do those would be like little lines coming out of the top of the tree. So this is today where you're at. So let's say that you're starting this today. You do those coming out of the tree. So that kind of pulls this tree up. And then what you can do is say, okay, I'm going to look at this and I'm going to go to the roots and I'm going to fill in what I know is the reason why I'm feeling like this, like you told me. Fill it all in, just draw it off the roots, like little lines and little sentences, little words in bubbles. Don't let anything float. Think of roots. Each root's connected to a previous root. Nothing floats. The sand is on the roots are connected. So draw little lines and write words on lines. And if it's a phrase, write a bubble. So in the toxic side, just describe what you can. And as you're doing it, if something pops up of, I've countered that I'm already kind of managing that by doing this, you can put that on the other side, of the sort of healthier roots. And then limit your time. Maybe for the first time, just do 3 minutes of each. So it's 5 steps, 15 minutes, okay? So 3 minutes, just do it quite fast. Just gather awareness of the signals, spend like a minute or 2 to 3 minutes doing that. And then as you've gathered awareness of the signals, the 4 different ones, you're still with me, the balloons, 3 minutes for each. Then you're going to immediately go to the next step, which is reflect. Why am I doing this? And that's when you fill in the roots. Just 3 minutes. Just allow yourself 3 minutes. And if something pops up that you've already worked out how to solve it, pop it on the other side, on the other root. Then I want you to then go into the next step where you actually look at what you've done and say, okay, whatever comes out of my head now, put it wherever you think it's appropriate. So maybe it will come out the trunk. Oh, I processed it like this because the trunk is how I processed. How did I see it at that moment? Oh, that behavior pattern, which would then be a manifestation, whatever's a manifestation, whatever's like showing up, like not being able to trust people or losing your temper, or I don't know, I'm just making up stuff. Whatever's something that how it was showing up in your life, draw that out of the branches. Does that make sense? And just blast for 3 minutes. Just see what comes out. So it's more filling in on the branches and on the processing. And if something comes up in the root, if as you're doing it, you say, oh gosh, I've suddenly seen the connection, that is definitely linked to that. Just draw an arrow. That's taken you already into, when you start seeing that, you've stepped into the 4th step. Because when you blast it on the page, where you just literally empty whatever's coming up, wherever you think it's going to fit in. If it's mainly the branches in this at this phase, but it could also, doesn't mean if something comes up that's a root, pop it there, a good root. You know what? If you don't know where to put it, just put it on the page. Just whatever comes up, just dump it. And if you can connect it somewhere, connect it. In the recheck, you're going to go and have a look and say, okay, take another color and then start linking, circle that word. I don't know where to put that word. Actually, that's a behavior that I'm doing that's connected to that. And start seeing if you can see the patterns and the triggers. And then do that for 2 minutes. And then for 1 minute, say, okay, I'm looking at this. This is what's happened now. What can I do today, now, out of this? How can I handle this right now? Don't make it big, make it small. Something very manageable. And you can say, okay, I can see that I'm stuck in this. I'm still being triggered, feeling the lack of empowerment. It's still very strong. But I don't have to feel that. I'm working on it. I can see where it's coming from. So it could be something as simple as that. You move to active reach. Active reach will be, what do I need today to keep me anchored, that I don't get thrown by this email or find myself going back while I'm making dinner or driving the car, doing whatever it is that you do. Going back to, oh, why has he done this? It's so unfair. And finding yourself going through you don't allow yourself to do that. Just, okay, I'll do that tomorrow. Today, I'm just going to focus on, hey, I'm finding the reason. I'm working on this. It's okay. It's okay to be messy. Something that's very encouraging to yourself that keeps you anchored in the growth forward. Hang it onto something like something beautiful, like a sunset or a white rose, or I don't know, a picture of your children's faces when they're smiling, whatever makes you feel a burst of happiness and beauty. Does that make sense? And during the course of the day, as it pops up, try and record initially, like if it pops up, just if you're driving, you can't record, but immediately don't allow yourself to go down the rumination route. Immediately start doing recall the image. If it's a white rose and the statement is, it's okay, I've got this. I know where this is coming from. He's not going to control me forever. I'm working on this. Whatever the little statement is, write that down. In the app, there's actually a place where you can, so all this is, I guide you through this in the app. So if you do it through the app, you can see this. There's actually a little place in your app where you can type in the active reach. You can set it to remind you so it can pop up. So in addition to you responding to anything, any time that the intrusive thought pops up, you can also have the app remind you. The point is to, each time it comes up, is you are seeing this is the issue, you're acknowledging, but this is what you're doing about it. And then you go to the active reach, which anchors you in the progress forward. That is taking energy away from that disempowerment that you're feeling, and you're putting it towards a very progressive step. You literally are getting yourself to start making a new path in the brain. You're taking the energy from the toxicity. The tree's getting smaller and smaller and smaller each time you do this. And then tomorrow you pick up. And I would stick with 3 minutes, 15 minutes for this first week, and then see how you do. And then maybe you can, second week, you can maybe increase it to 30 minutes, and then increase it to 45, and then move in that cycle whatever the day feels like that you need to handle, and really push through for the 63 days. Remembering that once you get to phase 2, which is very guided in the app, I'd really recommend you do this with the app, because it's not expensive at all, but it's really guiding you through the process. And then the second phase is just the short steps. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it sounds very empowering, which I like.
It's very empowering. Now you can do that, and then you want to know how to help your kids. You doing that and showing how it's helping you. I promise you, when you work through a cycle of 63 days, I'd get through the whole cycle. You can tell them what you're doing, but get through a whole cycle. If you start feeling, oh, this is amazing, I need to get them going now. I don't want to stop you doing that. Encourage them, because I'd like all of you to get all your kids into the Neurocycle doing this, because you can share with each other and you can help each other, and you can have little collaborative groups where you can talk in a very organized way around the Neurocycle. You can literally have little family therapy gatherings. I used to do this all the time in my practice. And you're working around this guided process of the Neurocycle, and each of you adding your element about an incident or whatever. And it's very, very healing, because each time it's got to end on that note of, okay, what are we going to do today? What do we need to do today? This is all we can handle today. What are we going to do to help us move forward? And you can collectively, each have your own active reaches or share what you did or something like that. So at any point in the process, you can get your kids going. If you want to get them going today and do it parallel to you, get them going today. If they don't want to, that's fine. You do it and let them see your experience and tell your experience, because your model of what you do is the best way to help your kids. When you say, hey, listen, this is what I experienced. This is what I've gone through. This is how I did it. It's so structured and organized. I've trained so many therapists and counselors and family practitioners and mental health practitioners over the years. And so many of them, once they get the sort of structure in place and you see this, they move their clients into this, using their techniques, but moving into this framework, because it really helps to do that rewiring in the way that, you've asked me. Now, I've said a lot. We've got a couple of minutes left. Would you like to ask any questions, or would you like me to unpack anything in a little bit more detail? Is there anything you misunderstood or wasn't clear enough?
No, I think it's good. I'm excited to do it. And my children, I think I know 2 of them will definitely do it with me. And one of them's starting her psychology degree. So
fantastic. Well, get them in, do it together. And then the ones that don't want to, when they see how it's helping you, that's the best model. You can't force anyone to do anything. But when they see how you are managing, I've had 8-year-olds who've been very traumatized, watching their mom do it just to help them cope with the child's trauma. I put that story in the book. It's a really sad story, but it has a happy ending. And this child watched the mom, who did it in desperation for herself. And this 8-year-old said, I want to do that. And, she adapted it down, and it changed the child's life. And now that family neurocycles all the time, doing little mini neurocycles in like if emergency comes up, you can do it in 1 minute. You can do all 5 steps in a minute. There's a lot of mini neurocycles. I teach that in the app as well, and in the book, where you can use it. It's mind management. The neurocycle is mind management. It's how you get the messy mind under control, tuning into the wise mind, and driving the changes in the brain that you want the way you want them. That's essentially what's happening. So you don't want your husband to steal your ex to steal your power anymore. You don't want to be affected by when he sends those emails or he says these things. You just want, that's his issue. You don't want it to cut you, and that stabbing in your stomach, and that feeling of I'm not good enough, or I'm got no power, I'm hopeless. You don't want him to have that power over you. You want to break that completely. And it requires very sequential, time-based steps to do that.
Yes, makes sense. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me. And I'd love to have you back on in a couple of months' time and just share how it's going with you and your family and how this has helped you.
I would love that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.